Good afternoon. Welcome to the third and final webinar of the NAWRS 2018 Summer Virtual Workshop Series. My name is Tony Ong from Public Consulting Group and a member of the NAWRS Board of Directors. I will be your moderator for today's session, The Changing Nature of Work. Today, independent workers, short-term, task-based, autonomous, or part-time make up almost 30% of the American workforce, and the numbers are projected to grow significantly by 2025. These workers, by and large, struggle to know week to week how much they will be working and how much income they will bring in. While you're likely familiar with Lyft, Uber, TaskRabbit, and other side hustle gigs, the traditional workplace itself is evolving with new automation technologies, greater business outsourcing, and advanced scheduling software that notify workers in a just-in-time fashion as to whether they're going to be called into work that day. Workers now more than ever need training, technology tools, and financial and business literacy skills to help them succeed in the 21st century labor market. We are finding that programs like entrepreneurship training, financial coaching, and continuous skill development are leading to improved employment rates and increased wages. Moreover, this type of coaching and training helps workers become nimbler. That's no longer likely to be linear. We have an amazing panel today for a great discussion about new approaches to employment services that are aimed at helping job seekers adapt to the emerging reality of the changing labor market. Our first panelist today is Carlos Moreno from Empath. Carlos serves as Empath's coordinator of Mobility Mentoring Center, overseeing a team of specialists deployed throughout Empath to build bridge pillar capacity amongst Empath staff and program participants. The Mobility Mentoring Center is located at Empath's office in downtown Boston. Staff members with special expertise in career management, financial literacy, and higher education help low-income families set and reach personal goals. Individuals receive free assessments, one-on-one coaching, and referrals to community resources. Next, we'll have Angela Pate from Public Consulting Group. Angela's experience in multiple industries, such as structural engineering, software development, workforce, and business development, has led to the founding of Opportunity Quest. Opportunity Quest is an entrepreneurship training program created for welfare transition participants by a collaboration between workforce development boards, regional economic development entities, and local entrepreneurship clusters. The program teaches the participants how to think like business owners by helping them focus on what they do best, take control of their money, explore new paths to self-employment, and hear from those who've been there and made it. Participants receive personalized business coaching to help them advance their business ideas to the next level. Upon completion of the program, they become part of a startup incubator. The incubator provides ongoing support for program participants for their businesses. And finally, and third, we have David Parker from Entrepreneurship for All. David spent 10 years in the publishing industry in business development and marketing roles, then 15 years in 6 technology startups in marketing, business development, and CEO roles. Companies included TripAdvisor, Direct Hit, ViaWeb, and Soundbite. 6 years ago, David founded Entrepreneurship for All to help residents in the cities of Lowell and Lawrence, Massachusetts, pursue their dreams of starting companies and nonprofits. This was based on a strong belief that grassroots entrepreneurship can solve any community's problems. E4All has developed a high-touch, one-year program that works closely with underrepresented residents to help them launch and then have a good chance of success with their ideas. The program is powered by hundreds of local volunteers who are recruited by a 2-person paid staff. E4All is in 6 regions in Massachusetts and is in serious discussions with communities across the country for future expansion, with a goal to reach 50 communities over the next 5 years. All right, just a couple of housekeeping notes before we start. We're going to go through the presentations first and then have a question and answer period. So for folks that have questions, if you could ask your question through the chat screen in WebEx, and then we will take those questions once we conclude the 3 presentations.
And this is Deb Joffe. I'm the host of the WebEx, so you'll send them to me as the host, please, the questions. Also, I'm getting a little bit of commentary that maybe there's some echoing in in the audio. So if anyone else is having any trouble with echoing, please send me a message just so I can identify whether it's a larger issue or maybe just one particular participant's phone.
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to turn it to Carlos, who's going to start us off. And Carlos, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Deb and Tony. I really appreciate you all having Empath a part of the webinar to talk about one of my favorite topics, financial coaching. And Tony and Deb, if you don't mind just clicking through the slides while I talk here, that'd be great. For those who aren't familiar with Empath, we were established in 2006 as Crittenton's Women's Union, and this was with the merger of two Boston nonprofit organizations that were specifically focused on working with low-income women. Crittenton's Hastings House was founded in 1824, and the Women's Union was founded in 1877. So we've been around for a little while now. We changed our name to Empath, Economic Mobility Pathways, on July 1st, 2016. And that was helpful for a lot of people because we don't just serve women anymore, and we're not a credit union. Our mission is to transform people's lives by helping them move out of poverty and providing other institutions with the tools to systematically do the same. And so the next slide really gives you a sense of the folks that we serve. So organization-wide, we serve a little over 1,500 low-income individuals a year.
Carlos, this is Deb.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a quick minute. Would you mind speaking a little louder or a little closer to the phone? Folks are having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
That's much better on my end. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no problem. Empath provides impactful and cost-effective anti-poverty programs. Participants are typically engaged in the following emergency shelter programs for somewhere around 18 to 24 months. We have about 5 emergency shelters. This includes Hastings House, which is our largest shelter. It has about 58 beds for mothers and children and women in their third trimester of pregnancy. We have what we call our scatter sites, which is shelter in the community. There's about 56 apartments in the Boston community for single or two-parent households with children. Hosmer, which is co-sheltering, has about 34 families. This is a mother and one child under 6 years old who's housed for 2 family per unit. Horizons, which used to be our domestic violence shelter, is now just an emergency shelter, and that houses about 8 moms and their child. And last but not least, when folks are transitioning out of shelter, we have what we call our stabilization program, and that's for family, again, who's in the transition out of shelter and into housing stabilization. So that's our short-term program, and then we have 2 long-term programs, and when I say long-term, they're 5 years. So our first long-term program is the CFO program, Career, Family, and Opportunity program, and our second long-term program is the Mass Leap program, and that program works with different housing authorities in the Boston area. Our work is built on 2 key poverty alleviation tools that we believe to be best practices in helping low-income families achieve upward economic mobility. So the first tool is what we call our mobility mentoring tool, and you'll see on this slide that it has a couple of different elements. So the first element is the bridge to self-sufficiency. We have goal setting, incentives, and coaching. So Tony, if you don't mind going to that next slide. Mobility mentoring, and there's different types of coaching that are out there, but mobility mentoring is the professional practice of partnering with clients so that over time they're able to acquire the resources, skills, and sustained behavior changes necessary to attain and preserve their economic independence. Now, that's how we define mobility mentoring, but I just want to highlight a couple of those words in that sentence. The first word that I want to highlight is partnering. So we work with families to build relationships, to build trust. We have a co-investment model, meaning we are working with participants and we're meeting them where they are, and we're putting in 50%, and the families have to put in 50%. We also know that over time, we're hoping that they acquire these skills. And so we always say that as mentors, we go away, right? We become obsolete. And the participants, if we're doing our jobs correctly, are able to obtain a lot of these habits over time. The mentoring is individualized and it's framed by the goals participants set with their mentors. Um, the second tool is the bridge to self-sufficiency. So we'll go to that next slide. And what you'll notice is the bridge to self-sufficiency is a theory of change that breaks down silos and uses a comprehensive approach to upward economic mobility. Now, when you look at this slide, there's a lot going on, but I just want to walk you through the bridge to self-sufficiency really quickly. So there's 5 pillars on the bridge to self-sufficiency. You have family stability, and that's broken down into housing and family, right? And so that's making sure someone has housing, and then that we're also checking in on their dependents or their social networks. The second part of the bridge is health and well-being, and this is specifically around physical and mental health as well as their networks, making sure that they have a positive network and not a draining network. Finances, which I'll talk a bit about today, is broken down into 2 different sections: debt and savings, education and training, and then last but not least, employment and career. And so what you'll notice is there's different levels of the bridge, and everyone that we work with is on a different part of the bridge. Now, the idea of the bridge is not to get to the top rung of the bridge. The idea is really to get an understanding of where the participant is and where the participant wants to go. And so the bridge is a special tool to help us create that path with participants. The bridge was developed by Empath and is backed by the emerging brain science. And so mobility mentoring uses the bridge to self-sufficiency in order to help families achieve long-term economic mobility. And like I said, the bridge helps families plan, reach, and sustain their personal goals in all 5 essential parts of the area. And so the interesting thing about the bridge is not to just focus on one part. It's not to just focus on finances, not to just focus on education. We know that there's a direct correlation between every single part of the bridge here. The bridge also takes a comprehensive approach because it's difficult in one part of someone's life that we know that it can create difficulties, but fortunately the opposite holds true because success in one part of someone's life can reinforce success in someone else's part of life. I prior to this role, I served as the mobility mentoring financial coach, providing personal financial goal. And so on the next slide, you'll just get a picture of who I am. And I really have a passion for finances. I've worked in banking, and so putting together budgets and understanding assets is something that I'm really passionate about because I know how it affects low-income communities of color. And part of that reason is because I spent most of my youth working with low-income communities of color around social justice. And so this issue is coming around full circle for me. On the next slide, you'll notice that as a financial specialist, there's a couple of different areas when we're talking and when we're meeting with a participant, there's a couple of different areas that we focus on. One of the areas that we focus on is really helping someone create a financial plan. And this is summarizing and keeping it as simple as possible and understanding what someone's financial goals are and helping them stay on track. Budgeting is a key component of the work that we do. And so developing a really simple budget that works for the participant. And again, it has to come from the participant. And so whether it's an app, it's an Excel spreadsheet, whatever works best for the participant, we want to ensure that we create something that they're able to follow. Smart spending is huge, and that goes into budgeting. I mean, we talk about needs versus wants all the time, and so it's really just bringing conscience to how someone is spending their money. We also want to ensure that we're helping families save money, whether it's for a rainy day fund or it's for their down payment for a home, whatever the case may be. We want to make sure that we help families get into the habit of saving money. Banking is a really big issue, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But with banking, we want to make sure that we work with families to find the right bank account that fits their lifestyle. Credit and debt is an issue that comes up all the time in terms of having the right credit score and being able to qualify for the right product. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then last but not least, we do talk with participants about long-term planning, whether it's retirement, college savings, preparing for the home buying process, and we do this both in our short as well as our long-term program. Now, I have about 9 minutes left, and so what I really want to cover in the next slide, one is what are challenges that our participants face? How do we define financial coaching? How do we start a financial conversation? And then how do we create a financial plan? So the first thing that I want to start off with, and I'm sure a lot of the work that we're all doing, I'm sure some folks have experienced this, but in the next slide, you'll notice just some common challenges that some of our participants face. So one of those things is misleading financial information. There's so much information out there on how to improve your credit or how to pay down debt, and not every single information is correct. And so being able to give participants the right information is key in the work that we do. Lack of financial knowledge is a huge part of the work that we do. Oftentimes, we're talking to families and trying to debunk myths that they've heard about certain financial products. Underbanked and not banked at all is a really big issue. We have a lot of families who are paying really high fees with certain bank accounts, and again, just making sure that they have the right products. Lack of savings, lack of budgeting, lack of credit, those are just a few examples that participants face. And then last but not least, a lot of folks fall victim to predatory lending, scams, student loan scams, and for-profit schools. And so those are just some examples of the issues that we see participants face. But on a larger scale, it's quite scary to hear some of these stats. On the next slide, you'll notice that 1/3 of Americans consistently maintain a household budget. That means 2/3 of folks aren't maintaining a household budget. The savings rate in the U.S. is at an all-time low. 70% of us don't have $1,000 in the bank. So if you think of 10 people in your life, pick out 7 out of those 10, and those folks don't have $1,000 in the bank, which is very scary because half of Americans would have to borrow money or sell something if an emergency came up. And what's even scarier is most folks are concerned and anxious about their financial well-being. A good chunk of folks are anxious about their financial well-being. And I always say this, when you push the numbers to the side, what's really left over is the emotions and well-being. And so a lot of the work that we do around financial education and financial coaching is really around addressing those emotions. I do have to say that this concept of financial coaching and financial well-being is a fairly new concept, and the Center of Financial Security actually developed this next slide, which it talks about the difference between financial coaching, financial counseling, and financial education. And so what we really focus on is we focus on coaching. We know that financial coaching is the first step is making sure that the client is stable and they're at a place in their life where they can talk about finances. We know that financial coaching is client defined, right? So they have to come up with the goals and they have to believe in what they're doing. And it can't come from the mentors. And if it does, oftentimes those goals won't be completed, won't be accomplished. Making sure that the relationship with the client and the coach is consistent. Actively listening as a coach and really understanding where the participant is and where the participant wants to go is a key component of coaching. And making sure that as a coach we follow up and we're accountable for what we say we are going to do. And the reason I really like this definition of financial coaching is really because we're not in the business to tell people what to do. Our participants are in total control of their life, and all we can do is really provide resources and feedback and really help them move the needle in terms of their financial life. I think starting the financial conversation is always the question that I get. And so what you'll notice on the next slide is that there's two really key components in terms of starting the financial conversation. The first one is, as coaches, understanding our own comfort level when it comes to finances. Like I said, I don't think there's a single person who doesn't think about finances. And so as coaches, we need to understand what parts of finances, maybe it's credit, maybe it's budgeting, that we feel really good about in our own lives, and maybe savings and talking about debt is something that we don't feel super comfortable. But really understanding what we're comfortable is extremely helpful. The second, just quick point about starting a financial conversation is being able to get the full picture. Like I said earlier, the bridge to self-sufficiency is an assessment that we use to really get an understanding of where someone is and where they want to go. We want to make sure that we're gathering as much information as possible, whether it's paperwork, it's bills, maybe it's mail that the client hasn't even opened yet. Making sure that we're gathering that information. Consumer reports like credit reports are extremely important. What you'll notice on the next slide is there's a questionnaire, and credits to the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There's a great questionnaire there, and this really gets to assessing your financial well-being scale. On the next slide, Tony, if you will. So that is the assessment from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And on this slide, Thrivent Financials does some really great work. And this is just a tool. I'm sort of flying through this, but this is just a tool. It's called the Personal Financial Wheel. And as you can see, it's broken up into a couple of different sections in terms of debt, savings, credit report, budget. And the idea is really measure how confident you feel in these specific area and what it will take to get you to move on to the next level. So if you feel like you're a 4 when it comes to budgeting, asking the participant, what would it take for you to get to a 5 in this specific section? In the next slide, I created just a couple of things that's extremely helpful in terms of creating a financial plan. Writing a written plan is huge. Knowing how to deal with creditors, creating what I call a debt report summary, which honestly just it's a one-pager. It has all the debts that are listed on there, what status it's in, and then what actions you should take. What's helpful about that debt report summary is you understand the possible outcomes for different strategies, and you can advise participants, how to prioritize debt. A couple of other pointers that I put on there, just knowing your options for debt management, continue to make the minimum payment on balances that are open and active. Snowball effect is something I can talk a little bit about, but most people know, which is just paying off the smallest and then moving on to the biggest debt. Settling is an option, and then paying for deletion is another really big one. On the next slide, after you've started the debt conversation and you've created your goal, I think the big thing for us is making sure that we're helping participants take action. And so that could be a number of things. It could be disputing the errors on the credit report. It could be creating a budget. It could be creating a SMART goals, but these are just some tips on how to get started. On the next slide, the last thing that I said on there was creating SMART goals. And so for a lot of people, they're always questioning on what goals you can create in specific categories. And I won't get into too much detail, but what I created for you all is just a couple of different buckets, financial buckets. So managing debt, developing good banking relationships, account management, continuing to save, and then it has how you can coach a participant around it, and then what are some goals that you can set in that specific area. Continuing with the conversation on how to get started, I have on the next slide just an example of the goal setting process, and most people have seen this, the SMART goal setting process. And the idea is to create the main goal right on top and then to break down the action steps. And so this is just an example of a SMART goal setting tool that someone created. I'm going to wrap up here. In the next couple of slides, I just want to show you a few outcomes of the organization. And so what this is showing you is a comparison between the short-term program and the long-term program. We had 74% of folks increase their bridge scores in the short-term program, and 85% of those folks completed those goals in the long-term program. And I should say here that the short-term program started the work that is often continued in the long-term programs. And on this following slide, you'll notice some of our outcomes in 2017. We had 602 participants who weren't enrolled in school when they started at Empath, and then 290 became enrolled at the time of the program. Just to jump down really quickly in terms of some of our financial outcomes, 509 participants didn't have a savings at program start, and 329 started saving before the program exited. My last point that I want to throw out there is I think the work that we do is quite impressive because it's not just about finances. It's really working with the participant in a holistic way. And there's a couple of different ways of getting involved. So on the next slide, you'll notice the Economic Mobility Exchange. And so if you're interested in getting involved with Empath, our learning network is called the Exchange. The Exchange is a membership-based community of organizations that want to learn about mobility and mentoring. And there are different trainings that gets a little bit more into the work that I was just talking about. But on the next slide, you'll notice the Exchange. And just to give you an example, there's over 100 member organizations from 5 different countries, including the U.S., Canada, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Australia. And so on the next slide is just a couple of pictures of some of the organizations involved in the Exchange. I'm going to stop there just because that's a ton of information, and I'm definitely over time, but I'm very interested in hearing from the other presenters and any questions that might come up later on.
Thank you, Carlos. That was great. We're going to move very quickly to Angela, and go ahead, Angela. Take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? If you don't tell me no, I'll assume that's a yes. And I want to give Deb a heads up that on slide 2 and slide 9, I've got some little clicks you're going to have to do for me. Otherwise, it's just switching slides. So thank you for coming. We're talking about the changing nature of work, and I'm going to be starting with some concepts about why this is important and what is the changing nature of work and some of the reasons of considering it strongly in our policy and practice areas. And then I'll go into the programs we're doing and how they've been going and their history and their success. We're very, very happy with them. So next slide. For the first click, I just want to start off kind of talking about work and how it's so much a part of our social structure. This is historic. We know this. We don't need to review it. I just want to start with this perspective and then click once on this slide, like a right click. We went all the way up into the Industrial Revolution, working through growing the ability for people to organize into communities, teams, firms, companies. And then when we got into the Industrial Revolution, we started doing mass production, and that's really when we shifted the way we work from being independent candlestick makers and blacksmiths and independent contractors, independent workers, into the concept of a firm and working for a company, and the idea of employees and employment began really with mass production and the Industrial Revolution. Click one more right on this one, and what this meant was that we were able to produce an enormous amount as a species on the planet. And this is just an example of what it took to create a shirt before there was automation. This came from a colleague of mine, a friend named Devin Fiddler, who I'll talk about in a minute. But, you know, he kind of just calculated out if you were actually going to spin the thread and weave the cloth and do everything, that shirt would cost you about $3,500 at $7.25 an hour these days. So the quality of life expanded exponentially as we hit the Industrial Revolution in the last 100 years. So next slide. So what this means is poverty reduced. Now on the left are people's perceptions about poverty in the last 30 years. This is why this is important. People think that things are getting worse. 55% think poverty's increased in the last 30 years. A third think it stayed about the same. The graph on the right is reality, which means the population went way up in the green, and the red is poverty, and it's gone way down. We've literally cut poverty in half. It was a goal up until 2020 to cut it in half, and we've already done it. So the automation, the technology, now we're afraid it's going to be AI or whatever. It historically, up till this point, has always been beneficial at improving the quality of life, and we don't have a lot of people starving as we had feared when we started introducing healthcare and technology and making life longer, and we don't have all of the problems that people thought was going to come from bringing technology forth. So next slide. So now we're looking at the future. This is a whiteboard of a think tank in Palo Alto called the Institute for the Future. And, life's complicated now. We've gotten past the Industrial Revolution. We're now into the knowledge economy and the innovation economy. And there's so many ideas and platforms and activities going on that it's really hard to keep up with anything these days. And certainly the people we're serving that have the lowest education levels and the biggest barriers to life are struggling with how to deal with so much information and so many options, and navigating it all through the systems is very, very challenging. So another reason why it's important to start thinking about the changing nature of work and how we have to start incorporating it into our policies and activities. Next slide. So to that point, think about the careers that are going on now and which ones are going to be replaced and which ones aren't, and how that's going to affect the workers and what opportunities we have for people to be self-sufficient. There's a lot of research going on about this. There's a lot of discussion. This is one I just wanted to bring to your attention because a lot of people think that only those things that are repetitive tasks are going to be replaced. Not true. There's going to be paralegals replaced who have to think and read. It's not just machinery or manufacturing jobs that are going to be replaced. This is actually work being done by Devin Fiddler, who is one of the fellows at the Institute for the Future. He's writing software that basically does management, and the software, the algorithms, manage the humans. So, for example, if we wanted to have somebody create this PowerPoint presentation we're looking at right now, he could plug in all the parameters to his software, and it would go out on Upwork or some of the platforms where you can go get software written or business plans done, and it could put out the information of what it wants. It could get the bids back. It could look at the ratings of the people that are proposing to do the work, It could choose them 3 or 4. It could have them done. It could bring it back and then analyze them. Then it hands it off to copywriters who do their part and brings it back. Then it hands it off to editors who do their part and bring it back. Then it goes off to people who review and rate it, bring it back with suggestions, make the suggestions. All of the top level management in the software that he's creating is handled by a platform instead of by humans, and the humans are doing the work for the platform. So I always use this as an example lately to communicate how fast things are changing. I was just facilitating a workshop in Las Vegas the other day, and we went around the room, and one of the gentlemen said, I'm from the AI Foundation, and we're designing virtual humans, and we'll be done within the next 2 years. And it just kind of dropped a bomb in the room of economic developers and workforce people trying to figure out how do you deal with that. Next slide. So this is just showing some of the impact. These are marketplaces and business growth. That orange circle there is 9 million online merchants today. Walmart's got 11,000 stores. Again, this speaks to how fast things are changing. That happened in the past 5-10 years, right? And how much opportunity it's creating for the people we serve every day. Don't need to belabor this, but it's here for you to look at. Things are changing so fast in a marketplace, the opportunities for people are growing as exponentially as the change is happening. And our goal is to make sure that the change happens in people's minds. Next slide. So, what is the workplace doing these days? This is a book written by David Weil that I would want to introduce to people. He used to be the head of the Wage and Hour Division at the Department of Labor for many years. It's called The Fissured Workplace. And the reason I want this to be understood is that when we get people self-sufficient, when we put them in jobs, it used to be that they worked for a company that there was a career ladder that they could go up and progress and increase wages. These are examples of a maid at Marriott who now works for Crestline Hotels, not for Marriott, but Marriott manages her. Loading dock crew that works for one company that works for another company that works for Walmart. Walmart doesn't hire these people, but they set all the standards, the pricing, and the requirements. So it's very complicated to keep the worker protections in place that we had over the last century because the industries are changing the way they do work. And the janitor, for example, at Kodak, who started there decades ago, is now the chief HR officer of the company. She went from a janitor all the way up to the C-level leadership of Kodak. Whereas today, the janitor at Apple can only raise up to a level of a crew chief with the subcontractor that Apple uses. So today, she doesn't have the same opportunities for career growth that happened for a generation ago. And this is because of a fissured workplace is a term that's been coined by David Weil, and many people are adopting. Next slide. So how does this affect the people who need the help the most? Excuse me a minute, I'm here coughing. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the triangle in the middle. And over the top of it, I've superimposed all the different organizations that serve the public in our social contract with the people of our country. The government, the Children and Families Department, Voc Rehab, they're dealing with physiological safety, social issues. Education and workforce development are now bringing them to a point where they have social standing, self-esteem. They start to think about themselves. Business is who's providing the greatest opportunity for everybody. So how all these organizations overlap with each other and what the policies are between them is critical. And a tremendous opportunity for us as practitioners and policymakers to keep in mind the bigger picture of how all the different systems interact with the actual needs. I really love the the bridge that Carlos just showed, because it was really kind of a similar approach of taking, you know, the life needs first all the way out to employment. And so we work in trying to create prosperity ecosystems that coordinate these different systems together, and working with different agencies and organizations to try to unify them and get them all working in the same direction. And when it works, it's a thing of beauty that is very successful. Next slide. So I'm going to start moving a little faster here. Who works? This represents the whole population of the United States. You're going to have a few clicks on this one, Debbie. These are the number of people that are employed within the population of the United States. These are those that are unemployed. That little red dot and that little tiny dot are the people that aren't even looking anymore. Next one. These are the people that are working part-time. Again, a subset of the whole. Keep going. Those are the people that are self-employed but not incorporated. Now stop right here a minute. These are all the human beings that are tracked by the Department of Labor in their categories of where they fall in labor market information. Now it's going to be a different picture. Click. These are businesses which are tracked by census, and the dark green area represents firms with 0 employees. So these are still just people working for themselves. And for the record, these people's wages are less than employees' wages on the previous slide. Click one more time. So here's the firms with those 24 million of them, not with 0 employees, superimposed on top of this. Now, if you think about this in terms of the workforce development system or the social service systems in general, whether it's children and families or aging and disability groups, whatever, we're all working, trying to get the people who are unemployed and with really low incomes and the biggest barriers back to work. Well, right now there's only 6 million of them. There's 24 million people who consider themselves self-employed who are also struggling, who may be trying to paint nails or braid hair or cut lawns or do all kinds of things that if we don't include them in this mix, number one, we're still ignoring a great portion of the population, and number two, we're not providing the talent into the business community to help grow economic development and more jobs for everybody else. So this is our argument about why we need to focus on entrepreneurship and why we need to focus on business training and connectivity in order to help the people who need it the most. Next slide. So right now, there's 162 million people working. About a third of them change jobs every year. 25 to 30 today are alternative or independent workers. That's going to be 50% by 2025. In the past decade, 2005 to 2015, most of the net job growth was in these alternative work arrangements, not standard jobs. So again, it's important to be looking at these other kinds of work arrangements and solutions for people. Next slide. This is from McKinsey, and it's describing the fact that it is not all people being forced into becoming self-employed or independent contractors. Those by choice are on the top row, and those out of necessity are in the bottom row. And you can see that there's, free agents and casual earners are 72% of those who become independent are doing it by choice. Only 28% are financially strapped or reluctant to do so. Next slide. Just trying to give you an overall view of the nature of work and the workers in it now. And I'm going to run through quickly our training programs. We have 4 that are youth and adults without high school diplomas, TechQuest and Startup Quest, and then 2 that are for youth and adults that are without high school diplomas, then 1 with some high school or some college, and then 1 for people with high-level educations who are still chronically unemployed. Most people don't realize that the same population in the same number of people in the homeless populations, for example, is 26%, which matches the national average. So just getting an education doesn't automatically mean you're okay. So let's run through these. The first one, go ahead, next slide, is TechQuest. And you can go ahead to the next slide. This program is for at-risk kids. Our pilot originally had great outcomes, 74% increased reading and math. We taught them about Me Incorporated. We taught them about entrepreneurship. We taught them how to picture themselves as someone giving interviews to people instead of going to interviews. We let them earn a slate in the process. This program's now been going on for the past 6 years in our community, and it's extremely successful. These are just numbers from our original pilot. Next slide. We also have a business mentoring program with our youth where we have high school kids who are at risk of dropout working as the CEO of a simulated family business and engaging their parents and siblings into that simulated company, which engages the parents and the school system and helps the kids that are really struggling to find self-esteem, again, moving them up that, Maslow pyramid there to get them to a point where they feel comfortable talking in front of people, they're learning technology, their family's engaged. It's a very effective program. Next slide. These are more details about it. It engages the community. It empowers the participants. We bring in the business community to all of our programs to mentor them and to help score them in presentations and pitches. Next slide. And Opportunity Quest, who I know Tony talked about, go ahead and hit the next slide, is for TANF recipients or people of that general education and income levels. Our pilot project, again, numbers here. We are having great luck with getting participants off welfare and successfully employed at higher rates and higher wages. Next slide. Startup Quest Bootcamp is next. Go ahead. This one is for more basic business training, and it's helpful for people who maybe have made it through high school and maybe a little bit of college, and they can bridge gaps in their resume and understand how to change their mindset and learn financial literacy, learn communication skills. Go ahead to the next slide. And it's a precursor, a very good precursor, to our highest level of training, which is for those people with college degrees. These are outcomes from a program which was the largest random control trial evaluation study ever done for entrepreneurship training in the history of the world, according to the World Bank. These are some of the outcomes from it. You can see the gains in self-employment, the reductions in UI. Overall, we didn't have as many people starting companies as we thought, but we had more people improving employment and wages than we thought. The economic impact, though, was very surprising. The number of companies they started, the number of jobs they got, the amount of income they gained in their family household incomes, totaled $85 million a year in economic impact across the state of Florida. We replicated this in 8 different areas across Florida. And you can see some of the outcomes. The taxes back to the government, they gave us $12 million. We gave them back $7 million a year for 5 years. So they gave us 12, we gave them back 35. They made a profit on giving us the grant. Next slide. The program itself includes mentors, teams using simulated companies that commercialize technologies out of the federal labs and the university systems, which most people aren't aware of. That these assets sit waiting, hoping entrepreneurs will take them to market. If we combine the research that's done in our country through all of our institutions with the people who need it, we will be able to create greater opportunity for them. Next slide. I'm almost done. Again, more impacts, numbers. I think this might be a bit duplicative, so I'm going to skip it. So here we are. This is the end. Why are we doing this? What is the goal? And so I've kind of put this together. It's kind of similar to what the McKinsey recent report was on the changing nature of work. We're starting with a challenge. We're finding a solution. We're coming up with innovative ways to deal with it for the goal of getting to prosperity. And IA and tech and automation is the challenge. Our social that we can do and training and social services are the solution. The methods we need to approach are policy and law. We need a lot of work done in that area. And then the goal to empower workers and create businesses and prosperity will be achieved if we follow through on those first three parts. And the last slide should be coming up. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I think I came close to my time limit, and that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Angela. Appreciate that. Very good. And finally, we're going to quickly move to David Parker. David?
Just a reminder before David starts, if you do have questions, feel free to send them to me via either chat or the Q&A function. And after David's done with his presentation, we'll take questions for all of the panelists. David?
There we go. Can everybody hear me?
We can, David.
Okay, great. So let's see, looking for that first slide. Okay, great. Let me jump in. Thanks to both Carlos and Angela, and they've sped through their presentation, so I'll try to follow suit and get through this as quickly as I can. Entrepreneurship for All is an organization, as you heard before, based in Massachusetts, looking to expand across the country. We have 6 programs going simultaneously here, with the mission of, as you see there, transforming lives and communities through grassroots entrepreneurship. The woman you see there on the slide is NAWRS. She's in Lawrence, Massachusetts, originally from the Dominican Republic. She's a first-generation immigrant. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about her as we get further in. The next slide. So really summarizing what you heard in greater depth from both Carlos and Angela, the economy and the workplace environment is changing so quickly. What can we do to affect that? And in particular, communities and community leadership, what can they do to make sure that their residents are ready for the rapidly changing environment? Next slide. So we believe that entrepreneurship is key to helping residents be ready for what's coming. Not only does it help folks develop their own ideas, but also develop a mindset of being nimble and looking for opportunities in the marketplace. Next slide. This is everywhere. Every community I go to, not just in Massachusetts, but literally across the country, and if I can just grab people individually or as a group and say, do you have an idea for a business? It's astounding how many people do have ideas for businesses. But then when I ask, what have you done about it, or have you started working on it, they shake their head no. We have this amazing pent-up demand for folks to get going with their own businesses, and an astounding percentage of those folks have not yet started to do it. Next. So at E4All, we have really a dual mission. At an individual level, we want to give every person, with an emphasis on those folks who are underrepresented, an opportunity to turn an idea into a successful business. And that, in turn, lets us transform communities into thriving and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems. Next up. So how do we do that? We have really a pretty simple flow of how we take these folks who literally have these ideas sitting in their heads and not having worked on them, and turn those into successful businesses, and in turn help their communities to prosper. So the very first part is, I'm sure everybody's seen Shark Tank. Just think of a localized version of Shark Tank down to the community level, where for a $1,000 grand prize, folks can stand at a microphone in front of a panel of local judges who are from the business community, and then a crowd that's typically is about 100 people, and in 2.5 minutes describe their idea. They've been given help on how to do this through a workshop, and they answer some questions from the judges, compete against other folks who also are presenting their ideas. And the money, while it's a draw for people to come into the pitch contest, is not anywhere near as important as the fact that these people are now starting to share their ideas. They're getting feedback from members of their community, usually quite a bit of encouragement and advice. And we've literally had entrepreneurs come to us and say, your program was fantastic, but let me tell you, the pitch contest itself made me get started with getting my business forward, because all of a sudden I realized that people thought it was a great idea. We encourage people who come to that pitch contest, which is a single-day event, and then apply for our accelerator program. An accelerator is a program that takes people and literally accelerates them through the process of launching their business and hopefully gives them all the tools and training to be successful. And so our program, because we intentionally go at underrepresented folks in the community, we have developed a high-touch version of our accelerator that knows what kind of people we're expecting to come into the program and has the resources available to help them. It's a one-year program. 3 months, the first 3 months are the intensive period where they have a whole bunch of resources helping them, including mentors, specialists. Almost all of them are volunteers from the community. We only have 2 staffers participating. But the entrepreneurs, it's a very time-intensive, at least 10 hours a week being put into this with a decent amount of pressure on them to perform. But they live up to the expectations. They do way better than they thought they would in the beginning. And literally, many of the entrepreneurs launch their businesses within the first 3 months, and all of them do by the end of the year. All of this accelerator program leads to businesses being formed. So the businesses range in many different types, but they're active in the community and helping their community to collectively to thrive. Next page. So I mentioned that we have a lot of volunteers, and this gives you a sense of what they do. So we have 2 staffers who, in essence, are community organizers. They reach into the community at many different levels and encourage people to get involved, not just in recruiting the entrepreneurs, which is very important because underserved entrepreneurs don't typically come forward without some extra touch to make them feel comfortable and trusting of the program. And so beyond the entrepreneurs, we have judges, folks who are teaching our content in the classroom as volunteers with a very strict curriculum that they follow, a leadership group that advises our program to make sure that we're hitting our mission. The mentors are probably the most important part of our program because we have a 3-to-1 ratio of business mentors who work with each entrepreneur. So when we have a cohort of 15 entrepreneurs, we have 45 mentors we've recruited from the community to work with them. We look for partner institutions to help us deliver our program to different audience groups and as well to help spread the word in the community about our program. And then dozens and dozens of folks who help us in reading applications to both the pitch contests and the accelerators. So think of our program as really leveraging existing assets in the community through a very small staff. Next slide. Here are some statistics on the entrepreneurs who come through our program. We are very proud of these statistics because they are higher percentages than any of these subsets in their general population if you look at the census. And it takes active effort on our part to make sure that we get each of these groups comfortable with our program and willing to apply to it. It is a free program. We do that intentionally so that nobody can claim there's any barriers to financial barriers to entering it. This is, we're called Entrepreneurship for All for a reason. Anybody can apply, and in addition to all of these folks who come from underserved groups, we do have others that enter into the program, so we end up with a nice blend of people from all walks of life. Next slide. Similar to what you heard from, and in particular, Carlos, and to a certain degree, Angela, in terms of the kind of challenges that the entrepreneurs bring to our program. So literally, we get folks coming to us and wanting to start a business, and they don't have any of these skills that you see on this slide. We do our best to teach these in sort of literally, as you're building your business, we're going to build a website. As you're developing your financial model, we're going to teach you how to use a spreadsheet. So it's very hands-on, very directed, with a very single point of outcome that we're looking for. People don't come out of here being experts in, say, spreadsheets, but they know how to build a spreadsheet that's got the financial model in it because we've given them a framework and told them how to do their inputs and how to look at the results that come from it. So everything is the skills that are needed. We make sure people address those skills and move on and keep their businesses moving. That nimbleness of like solving a very particular problem and then moving on to the next one, I think is critical to the success of our program, and also developing that mindset in our entrepreneurs that any obstacle can be overcome. Next one. Back to NAWRS. She came to us barely speaking English. She's, as I think I mentioned, she's a native from the Dominican Republic. She started in the food business and the baking business because both she and her husband were laid off. And in the 2008 recession, she used food stamps given to her by her mom to buy ingredients to make flan. She made flan from a family recipe and started selling it from her home to neighbors, friends, family, coworkers, and doubled the money of the cost of the ingredients and said, here's where I go. This is my business idea. As she tried to grow her business from her home with 4 children, she ran into roadblocks in that she wasn't permitted, and larger institutions like, gathering places, Knights of Columbus halls, et cetera, couldn't buy from her because she wasn't a registered business. So she came to our program and was looking for help at how she could get her business on a more sound basis. Our mentors worked with her, community members heard her pitch, people stepped forward in different ways, giving her advice in terms of her product lines, her pricing, really encouraged her to get out of the house and perhaps find a commercial kitchen that she might be able to rent space in. As it turns out, in her city of Lawrence, there was no commercial space that worked for her, and so she determined that she wanted to literally set up her own bakery. That's something that's very hard to do for entrepreneurs because it requires capital to sign a lease and make the leasehold improvements. But a local financial institution came up with a clever solution of helping her to purchase a retail building that had 2 retail shops in it. She bought the building with the bank's loan. The bank lent against the value of the building rather than her business. She had a tenant that could help her pay her rent, and then she started up her bakery in the space next door. She ended up hiring her husband. So the 2 of them now are working for the business. She's in charge. She has 10 employees and is looking to now sell the building and get into a larger one entirely for herself. So she's become this, gone from a situation of needing government assistance in every aspect of her life to being, a leader in the community, providing jobs, income for herself and her family, and an inspiration for anybody, all of her customers, all of her partners and suppliers. Next slide. So the impact that we get from our program, this is just from our first program in English serving the Lowell and Lawrence areas. 169 businesses launched, 400 jobs created from these startups. And then you see the numbers there for revenue and capital, and perhaps our most important number is that 83% of these folks are still in business. So we stay in touch with these folks for the first year and then for as long as we can afterwards, because they never stop needing help. We stay in touch with them forever in terms of getting these kind of statistics because we want to see them continue to grow. We're very proud of those numbers and the impact that they're having collectively on their communities. Next slide. So just some quick numbers. The $4,600 per job created. We keep reading of way, way higher numbers that communities, cities, states are offering for companies to move into their spaces. And so if you think about the efficiency of the money here, not only are you getting jobs created at a lower cost, but you're also getting a diversification of these jobs spread out over hundreds of businesses rather than in one business, which may or may not be successful down the road. So all kinds of other benefits come from these programs, and remember the efficiency that this is only done with 2 paid staffers. Next slide. The budget we have for that program is $300K a year. Half of that is paying for those staffers. There's some overhead, some operations, and some money coming back to the headquarters group of E4All for the services that we provide. So very reasonable cost and amazing payback for the community. And next slide. So happy to talk with folks. If you want to follow up with me directly, you can see my email is david@e4all.org. I am literally in discussions with many, many cities across the country about getting our program started. If anybody thinks that our program could be helpful in your community, I would love to talk with you. But now I'm done and happy to engage in the answers along with Carlos and Angela.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David. That was excellent. So now we are in the question and answer period. I'm going to turn it over to Deb, who has control of the WebEx here and has access to some of the questions that are out there.
Great. So the first question, thanks so much. I see several of them have been coming in, which is great. The one question for the whole panel. What is economic mobility, and what indicators do you use to measure or track it? And so I'll throw that open to any of our panelists. I'll unmute you all.
Yeah, I can jump in really quickly. This is Carlos from Empath. I mean, simply put, for us, economic mobility is really, again, helping folks get to a point where they are self-sufficient, right? Where they're doing things on their own. That's what economic mobility means for us. I mean, we work with families who at one point were surviving without mentors, without coaches, and we know that they will continue to survive without mentors and coaches moving forward. And so we play a very small role in someone's life, right? We have this window of opportunity where we're able to help folks build these skills, build these long-term skills that they can use in their life. So whether it's finances, education, career, I mean, anything that falls under the bridge, it really comes down to helping someone build these habits so long-term they're able to do these things on their own. And like I said earlier, we become obsolete. And so there's a couple of different tools. The one main tool that we use is the Bridge to Self-Sufficiency, and that falls under our mobility mentoring. And, you know, we have a 2-day training on this stuff. And if you're interested, we can get you connected. But that's just one of the tools that we use to help folks become self-sufficient.
Great. Angela or David, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Interestingly, that Carlos is saying self-sufficiency then is the point at which they're kind of economically mobile. No one will argue with that. We agree, and we're kind of in the same boat. I would step it up one step prior to that, though, and say if we can change the mindset of our participants to believe that they can become self-sufficient, that almost gets them out of being stagnant and not moving forward, and they become mobile, at least. They're not yet self-sufficient, but they start moving. Like if you get past the perceptions that I'm a convicted felon, I will never be able to succeed, or I'm homeless and there's nothing that's ever going to help me. It's the mindset shift for us that really is the biggest difference, but because once they get that mindset shift and they're ready to start changing their life and doing something for themselves, then it's possible to get them to self-sufficiency, at which point we're rejoicing. But getting that mindset shift is the hardest thing, and we have not found anything that changes that mindset shift more than financial literacy and entrepreneurship training and knowledge of how business works. Once we connect them with business mentors, again, exactly what Carlos and David are doing, that connection to successful business people is one of the key catalysts for that mindset shift, because they realize that it's not that different from people who are already very successful. So that's kind of my thinking.
David, any thoughts?
No, I think Carlos and Angela handled that one well. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Next question is I think this is to everybody on the panel. With the goal of these various programs being prosperity and lasting impact, what are some thoughts on generational wealth growth in underserved communities? How have you seen these programs contribute to net worth of families passed down? Is more time needed to observe this?
Well, in our programs, I can definitely agree with the question and say we don't have data, and I'm looking forward to that longitudinally, but we haven't successfully gotten past generations to be able to give an opinion one way or the other. Certainly a goal, but we don't have data to back it up.
Yeah, this is David, and it's a little hard to answer that question because I can look at it from multiple directions. Many of our entrepreneurs are first or second generation immigrants, and so often with a challenge of parents who maybe don't even speak any English, and the younger generation is charging ahead, trying to make a go of it, and in our cases, starting businesses. So we're really seeing an amazing shift from what the parents are able to do to what the kids can do. And likewise, even in my example of NAWRS, her children are involved as well in her business. And so there's an opportunity for her to develop the asset of the business and then have it be a workplace where her children would be able to immediately have a financial asset that they could nurture and grow, which is, it may not show in a savings, account, but the value of the business and the income stream from it is something that her children would possibly be able to take advantage of. So, but agreed with the tenor of the question, which is it's very hard to measure, and I'm not exactly sure what measurements are out there that we can take advantage of.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, for empath, I think what stands out for us is, and we hear this all the time, that oftentimes with the participants that we're working with, their kids are the driving factor in terms of what they do. And so just a quick example, I remember when I first, when our financial specialist started, we were having this conversation with a participant who is in our long-term program, and she didn't really want to talk about finances with her mentor. And so me and this new financial specialist started talking to her, and she really started to open up. And so the purpose of that initial conversation was to talk about credit and different strategies for her to increase her credit score. And so while we're starting the conversation, we're asking questions such as, why is this important to you? And she started to say, I want to buy a house. And so we started to talk about how credit is just a vehicle of having you to obtain that home. And so at the end of the conversation, she got to a point where she said, you know what, it's not just about building credit. My vision for buying this house is to see my kids running around in the backyard. And that visual was more important than anything else we could have talked about in that meeting. Mm-hmm. And so we understand that the kids are the driving force. We have some participants who have had joint meetings with their parents, and so they do bring their kids to the meeting. What's interesting about Empath is we have what's called the intergenerational program, the Intergen program, which is a program specifically designed for parents and their child to have the same conversations that we're having with parents. Now, I don't have the stats in front of me in terms of the improvements, but that is definitely something that I can pass on to share with you all. But that's just another model, and there's a bridge specifically for kids. There are different goals that they set. And that's a way that we've started having the conversation around generational wealth and all these other things that sort of fall on the bridge. But I'll be happy to share that information.
Great. I have another question for Carlos, actually. In your presentation, you spoke a lot about the need for financial security. How do you deal with participants who may be facing substance use disorder or a lack of education in their quest to secure long-term employment?
That is a great question, and so many different elements to that question. I guess the first thing is really to go back to that initial point about meeting the participants where they are, right? We've had a lot of participants where we've tried engaging with them, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work because life just isn't stable at that point, right? They're not ready to talk about finances. And I think when you force someone to talk about finances, it just creates this chaos and nothing really gets done. And so the first step is really to understand where the participant is at. The second thing is, and I know I keep referring back to the bridge, but this is so instrumental to the work that we do because it's not always about finances. And so if there's issues like mental health or substance abuse, what we try to do is that naturally comes up once we develop the relationship with the participant. And so we're setting goals, not just on finances, but we're setting goals in other parts of the bridge to help the participant with that specific obstacle. And so once we do that, then we're able to have a natural conversation around finances. And so outside of meeting the participant where they are, understanding just what other resources and options that this participant might need, and helping them go through those barriers before addressing the finances.
Great. So just a comment, I think this is probably in response to the question of how do you measure economic mobility. One of the participants just commented that measures of psychological self-sufficiency, or PSS, developed by Dr. Philip Hong from Loyola University in Chicago, could be one that captures the process of a mindset change or financial empowerment that leads to economic and financial outcomes. So that just may be something for folks on the webinar to take note of. Another question, and keep them coming. We've got 10 more minutes. One participant asked, and I think this might be for everybody, all of the panelists, are you leveraging any public funds for your initiative? If so, which ones, local, state, and or federal? So, Angela, do you want to start?
Sure. So we leverage state and federal funds. We have gotten grants from our state level workforce system for pilot projects, which we explore and experiment with to do research to determine what works. And then we take those to the federal level and propose them, and have been fairly active in over the past 6 or 7 years, getting some fairly sizable grants for the purpose of scaling and replicating the pilots that we managed to get funded at a smaller amount at the state level. So the state level fundings are $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 grants, and then when we get to the federal level, they're anywhere from, we got the smallest one was $4 million, one for 5, one for 10, one for 12 million. So they are really the federal level are more into scaling and replicating things that have been proven as best practices or promising practices and successful. And that seems to be a model that's working for us.
Great. David, how about you?
So the funding for Eat for All really comes from a public-private collaboration, and we have gotten some monies from the government at all three levels, but at the local level, to be honest, it's been passed through really of federal grants. So CDBG funds in particular have been routed by local direction towards our program to help the entrepreneurs. And at the state level in Massachusetts, they have quasi-governmental agencies in Massachusetts, and a few of those through grant programs have been able to send monies our way. We have not found consistent funding from the government. We're always looking and open to ideas on that front. We think that entrepreneurship, I think it's getting there in terms of within the workforce development field, considering entrepreneurship as a viable, place for monies to go, and so we're certainly eager to get in those discussions to see if that might happen. But in the meantime, our funding is coming primarily outside of government funds from foundations, individuals, corporations.
Awesome. And Carlos?
Yeah, so Empath is not a big organization. We're about a $3 million organization. So there's a couple of different sources where we get our funds. I'd say about 70% of our funding is coming from the Department of Housing and Community Development, so DHCD. Locally, just like David, we do get some money from the city, so CDBG, Community Development Block Grant. And more recently, we're running a program called Secure Jobs, which is funding through the Department of Transitional Assistance, so DTA. And then we have some private funding for our long-term program.
Great. Thanks so much. Here's another question. I think it's for all the panelists as well. How do you see this information impacting young adults with disabilities who've been included in regular ed classes all of their lives, but after graduating cannot go to school or find employment?
Yeah, so I'll jump in there. We have a lot of youth.
Please do.
We have a lot of youth programs, as I mentioned, and I know that there are a lot of different kinds of barriers. Specifically, youth with disabilities really succeed with tech training. We have a lot of programs in our community that focus on teaching kids with disabilities technology, and since our programs incorporate technology with our business training, we're finding it successful. I gotta say also for adults, this is true. We've had adults with disabilities who look back on their life and say, I've had a disability my whole life. I had one woman come up to me and said, I've been unemployed for 14 years and I have a master's degree. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. What, was wrong? And she says, I've been sick all this time and I couldn't work. But I've recently realized I wasn't sick. I just didn't want to go work for somebody else and have to get up every day, and my physical disabilities were affecting my attitude of how and what I could do. And this program changed my attitude. So I've realized it's not that I can't work. I just don't want to work for anybody else. I want to be an entrepreneur. So I'm going back to school and I'm upgrading my tech skills, and I'm going to start my own company, and I have mentors that are going to help me, and I am on go mode, and my life has changed forever. So I think if we can succeed in changing that mindset again, it's a big game changer. With the youth, what we're finding is that it opens their eyes, especially people with disabilities, also homeless youth, which are living on the street or in people's cars. We've had a lot of experience. Well, several participants that have we've watched them come out of homeless situations. If we can get them to just think differently and say, I'm going to be somebody who, presents themselves, this is me incorporated, this is my brand, this is my life, this is what I want to become, this is who I am, and they're proud of it, then there are no barriers anymore, and they don't, they're not they don't feel disabled very long. They don't feel homeless very long. They find ways around it, and getting the right mentors to them is the biggest issue. And before I shut up here, I will tell you that we've told our youth, one of our mentors, who's literally taken companies up into billions of dollars, extremely successful biotech mentored kids and said, quit school, quit high school. And we were all just gasping in the back of the room in fear and panic. And he said, I'm dead serious. Go get your GED and skip that and go right to college and start building your career right now. If you don't think you're going to graduate high school, leave and just take your own direction in your hands, move forward. I'll help you get your GED. So will all the people in this room. Go to college right now. And it really changed a lot of kids' attitudes about not thinking they were going to graduate or not feeling that they could and that they were just, at a dead end. So it's not specifically focused on people with disabilities, youth with disabilities, but it's certainly true for them as well as everybody.
And David or Carlos, anything to add on that topic?
It's David. Entrepreneurship for All, we welcome anybody into our program. It is just for adults, but there's no reason anybody with either a mental or a physical disability couldn't join our program and be successful as an entrepreneur.
Awesome. And Carlos, any final thoughts? I think we're winding down here on this question.
No, I think David and Angela did a really good job of summarizing that point. I agree 100%.
Awesome. Well, then I'll turn it back over to Tony to close this out.
Okay. Thank you very much. So wanted to thank our panelists again, Carlos Moreno, Angela Pate, and David Parker. This was a very engaging session, and I hope folks were able to get a lot out of it. Each of you that have called in today will be receiving a survey to rate the session and provide feedback for us. So if you could take a moment or two to complete that, we would appreciate that greatly. Also wanted to make a plug for our in-person workshop, the NAWRS in-person workshop for 2019. It's going to be July 28th to the 31st in New Orleans, and we hope to see everybody there. So with that, thank you again. Thank you, Deb, for hosting the WebEx and taking on the questions, and we will see each other soon. Thank you.